The movie Alien was a revelation when it was first unleashed on an unsuspecting public in the late 1970s. An entire generation raised on the heroic optimism of Star Wars and Flash Gordon now had to confront a bold new face of science fiction that left them feeling anxious, disgusted, and ambivalent. A similar reaction was greeted to Sigmund Freud in the 19th century, whose emergent system of psychoanalysis startled Victorian society with the proclamation that human beings were the incubators of unconscious drives that bloomed in the subterranean passages of their minds. And since it's recently passed the 40th anniversary of Alien, it feels like the right time to place it on the psychoanalytic couch and see what it has to say to us, since the film is, either deliberately or by accident, the most successful cultural advertisement for Freud's ideas ever made. I don't want to waste any time with elaborated introductions because I think that there's a lot to say in this movie already, so with all that being said, let's begin. The movie's opening is effective in that it mostly works on the non-verbal level. There is no monologue or backstory setting up the events. Instead, we are introduced to an environmental shot of outer space, with an ominous musical accompaniment that mimics the howling of cosmic winds. Nothing here is designed to make us feel like we are in the presence of the familiar. Even the film's title unfolds on us in a cryptic manner. Environmental depictions are key in visual storytelling, as they possess characteristics that communicate themes and ambiences that complement the piece as a whole. And I want to open this assessment in a similar way by talking about the different environments in the film and how they correlate positively to Freud's model of the psyche. It's difficult for us now to consider a time when people didn't conceptualize the mind as we do. Theories about the nature of mind have been abound for thousands of years, but the existence of an unconscious activity was not known to us until as recently as the 19th century. Freud's ideas have become so thoroughly internalized by modern people that even those who dislike his findings use a Freudian language. Words such as subconscious and projection are now a part of our everyday vocabulary. Sigmund Freud was the first archaeologist of inner space, and his discovery of the human subconscious brought over a new model of the human mind that we all rely on to this day. The model in question, as shown by this diagram, displays the broadest regions of activity in the mind, and we will add further elements to it as we proceed. This is sometimes referred to as the iceberg model, as it represents a smaller area above the waterline and a larger area submerged beneath the surface. The surface area above corresponds to all psychic activity which is available to consciousness, so that would be our thoughts, our waking fantasies, our inner monologues. Anything that we might be consciously aware of resides at this level. And beneath that we have a larger submerged area, which represents all psychic activity that is subconscious. As we can see, this suggests that most of our psychic operation is subconscious in nature, and this part of the picture will become much more relevant as we go on. So how do these domains of the mind relate to the structural elements of the movie? Well, we've already been introduced to the greatest spatial element in the way of outer space, which I am not going to say represents the subconscious, but the entire encompassing boundaries of the psyche itself. It is the bowl that holds the contents, so to speak. And likewise in Alien, it acts as a container for all the film's bodies, whether cosmic, organic, or artificial. The next new body we see coming in is the looming hull of the Nostromo, an industrial mining vessel owned by the Wayland Corporation, which in addition to its mineral payload, carries a human cargo and one artificial person or android, which acts as the ship's science officer. This vessel represents the arena of consciousness itself. The Nostromo embodies the space where the crew's civilized consciousness has been assimilated. Its artificial anatomy constitutes a system of learned habits where they can exercise their respective professions, and for the time being at least, acts as their surrogate home. The aesthetics of the ship are also important to take note of. Its many instruments and corridors possess none of the irregularities and admixtures of geometry as found in nature. It, like the room that you are encased in right now, was created by consciousness. In the following scene, we are next introduced to our cast, who we see emerging from a state of cryogenic sleep. We could diverge over which of these characters best reflects the basic elements of Freud's mental model, but for this assessment I'm going to say that these characters represent the dynamic interaction of thought within the mind, because despite believing in their own autonomy, their conscious behaviour, like our own, is affected by the structural influences around them. We could also look at the crew in another important sense, as a familial collective of brothers and sisters, with the various artificial factors surrounding them supplying a parental influence. Even the ship's onboard AI system is referred to as Mother. Through the lens of psychoanalysis, families represent an ecosystem of grounding experience that modulate the individual into what they become. By the time that a person reaches adulthood, they have already integrated a system of rationalizations, narratives, and defense mechanisms which validate their experiences to consciousness. But by contextualizing their personality within the wider contexts of familial arrangements and understanding how it has shaped them, obscurity is given over to clarity. Childhood experiences yield a further gateway into the land of dreams, sexuality, and the logic of non-rational consciousness, all of which are abundant in Alien. But Freud also saw how familial dysfunction could produce relationships between its members that bordered on the incestuous. His famous image of the Oedipal parent that smothers its own offspring will be an important image to hold in mind for when we come to analyse what happens later. The ship's captain, Dallas, represents the alpha brother, the sibling that commands the most favour of the parental influence and acts as its subordinate authority. However, Dallas is not the primary authority in this arrangement by any means. There are also those artificial influences that we have not spoken of. The ship's science officer, Ash, who was later discovered to be an android, exerts a quiet influence over the group throughout the first half of the film. Being a liminal figure between two worlds and also between two types of subject, human and artificial, Ash best embodies the structural element of the ego. In psychoanalysis, the ego is that mechanism within the psyche which mediates between the spaces of conscious and subconscious activity. It is essentially a gatekeeper which manages what contents is allowed into the conscious space and what material gets repressed into the subconscious. These traits complement his function in the movie, as he is the most knowledgeable about company protocol, he is in perpetual conversation with the paternal intelligence Mother, and he even overrides the mandates of other crew members, which leads to the introduction of contaminated bodies onto the ship. An interesting thing about Alien is that one of its most important players is never seen, only felt as an omnipotent presence guiding the events from without. We are, of course, talking about the ever-resourceful Wayland Corporation, who occupies the parental role of the father within the familial system, and the superego in the diagram. In the simplest terms, the superego could be seen as the admonitive part of the ego, which has been internalized through an identification with life guides such as parents, educational and religious figures, the state, and even societal expectations. Like its psychic counterpart, the invisible hand of the company is felt everywhere, whose corporate protocols permeate through the lives of the human crew, the android Ash, and even the Nostromo itself via the ship's onboard AI, In fact, Mother could be seen as an accompaniment to this parental function, since she mandates on-ship procedure through her commandeering of the ship's infrastructure and acts as a communicative bridge between the superego and its lieutenant Ash. By now we should be able to see a decent preliminary cross-comparison between the model of the mind as Freud conceived it and the structural elements of the film. And it is the interaction of these influences which redirects the course of the Nostromo and its crew to our next destination, the fog-shrouded continents of the id. Despite being a movie set in the future, Alien resonates with what is oldest and primal in us. You could easily replace the setting of the Nostromo for a Stone Age cave, the spacesuits for animal skins, and the alien organism for a mysterious disease, and all of the original context and meaning would still be intact, because it would be speaking to the same centers in us. Alien reaches into the depths of the human psyche and exploits our most private sensitivities over our natural predicament. Concerns over the integrity of the body and the ambiguities of our conscious experience are penetrating issues that come as part of the curse of the consciousness contract. We cannot simply commit as animals do, we must also consider, and that brings with it a whole host of intrusions into our conceptual space, which take the shape of cultural guises in order that we can reconcile them to consciousness. Alien is a culture form which communicates through the contemporary languages of biology and spaceflight technology, but that does not remove the undercurrent elements that it's still referring to. The serpent that lives in the unknown is an archaic motif that speaks to our ambivalent relationship with nature, and perhaps even our own evolutionary heritage when snakes predated upon our distant ancestors. No matter the developments in technology and culture, we cannot escape the permanence of history that lives on inside us. We tell the same stories precisely because we are dealing with the same dilemmas that affected us in the past: survival, overcoming the unknown, finding meaning in life, and the nature of existence itself. Dilemmas that at the deepest level we have toiled with since humans first gazed up at the stars. Expanses such as the sky and the ocean stand as mirrors of the human mind, reflecting back signals that excite our longing for understanding of its wild open spaces, and the recognition that the only way of finding out is by going there. And this primitive curiosity to explore the unknown is an important ingredient in Alien, as it entices the crew to wander from the conscious security of their familiar settings into the unfamiliar and inhospitable landscapes of the moon LV-426. So far, our analysis is centered around a correlation between the introductory elements of the film and the immediate conscious and pre-conscious zones of the psyche. The preceding scenes in the movie represent a shift in emphasis away from these centers and onto a new landscape of symbolism and context whose discovery contaminates the remainder of the film's events. Following an intercepted transmission of unknown origin, the crew of the Nostromo experienced their first estrangement from the familiar. Debates over the best course of action are firewalled by the ego Ash, who uses company protocol to justify an exploration of the moon for the source of the beacon. This takes us to a key environment, which can be correlated psychologically to the subconscious territories of the id. The tempestuous landscapes of the moon complement the characteristics of the id: primal, ambiguous, and impenetrable to the lights of reason and civilized culture. Freud conceptualized the id as that primitive part of the subconscious that remains as a handover from our animal heritage. It therefore represents the source of all compulsions that push us to fulfill the prerequisites of our organism, such as eating, reproducing, and self-preservation. These drives seed into consciousness as beacons of demand which, like the received transmission from LV426, resonate with purpose and potential for becoming. Words like pregnant and seed are ripe with meaning for this part of Alien, as the themes of sexuality present themselves with the discovery of a derelict craft. The crew enters into the craft through vaginal-like entrances, seeding into the space via the drive of curiosity. The aesthetics of the derelict craft as designed by the late artist H.R. Giger stand in opposition to the rigid articulations of geometry as found in the Nostromo. Here we can still detect a mechanical influence, though it were as if a machine and the innards of a great giant had fused together into a single petrified mutation. The aesthetics of life and death found at once within the same fossilized body. As well as drives which compel us towards life-fulfilling acts, Freud also put forward the idea of death drives, including the statement that the goal of all life is death. This emanates from Freud's persuasion that all living organisms have an unconscious impetus towards death as much as they do for life. As soon as an organism is brought into the world, it is already moving along a trajectory back into an inorganic state. And the tension between these two modes of living manifests in a variety of expressions. For example, the aggressive impetus towards destruction of an object or individual is associated to the drive towards death. So is anything that puts us at self-risk, such as mountain climbing or perhaps exploring an unknown craft in an inhospitable environment. It is our willingness to place ourselves in the driving seat of destruction that affirms our existence as much as any other compulsion towards living. A deeper exploration of the derelict craft reveals a chamber of eggs containing a parasitic life form, which succeeds in attaching itself to a member of the party named Cain. The creature exists purely to deliver its parasitic cargo by violently attaching itself to a host through the smothering action of its appendages, where it can then implant its seed down the throat of the host via its proboscis, making it effectively an act of rape. Rape is a violent union between two bodies, but it is also a union between the drives of life and death. If we look at the original design work made by Giger, we'll notice that the organism is a composite of various human and animal structures. Most important to note here is the central proboscis, which resembles a human penis entering into a vagina. The fact that its seed is delivered through an act of smothering also establishes the themes of life and death within a single act of violence. So to conclude this part then, the admixture of sexual motifs with the conversion of the host's life drive into a death drive, cements the space of LV426, the derelict craft, and this aggressive union of organisms with the primitive interests of the id. Now we finally possess a full synthesis of our mental model with the structural elements of Alien. The final chapter of this analysis will focus on the breakdown of the family unit, and the wider relationship of the alien organism to the film's players. With an incapacitated Cain, the search party successfully makes it back to the landing craft. Hesitant to allow them re-entry with the parasite still attached to Cain's body, Warrant Officer Ripley insists on upholding quarantine. However, yet again, the ego mechanism in Ash comes into effect, granting them access to the conscious arena. The introduction of this new agent disrupts the harmony of the family group. Intrigue, suspicion, and concern over the well-being of their brother Cain creates an atmosphere of ambivalence within the family setting. We may have returned to the security of conscious shores, but we have brought a trace of the id with us, and it saturates consciousness with its presence. Following the gestation of the alien larvae from Cain's body, a festering tension arises between Ripley and Ash, who interrogates him over the breaking of quarantine procedure and potentially jeopardizing the safety of the entire crew. This leads to a shocking revelation, not only about the nature of Ash's being, up until that point everyone had thought he was human like them, but also the true intentions of the parental systems, who have manipulated the crew into acquiring the alien specimen at no expense to their personal safety. This betrayal, which has led to the introduction of the alien parasite, the death of their brother Cain, and the near death of Ripley at the hands of Ash, is tantamount to a betrayal at the level of familial consciousness. When a child is betrayed by its parents, it dies to itself, because the betrayal is felt as an inversion of the life-fulfilling associations that the parent embodies. As an extension of the life drives of the parents, a child no longer feels authentic in their negation. It no longer considers itself real, like the other people around it, which are contrasted as the products of authentic and functional systems. The revelation of Ash as a synthetic was symbolic, in that it not only demonstrated the artificial nature of his condition as an entity, but also the artificial nature of everyone's relationship to the life systems around them. The entire family, including the android Ash, were all pawns in the game of an abstract and unsympathetic parent, who cared more about the preservation of alien life than it did the flesh and blood people who, however skeptical about their superiors, believed were in some way more important. This second birth of sorts is also a death for the android Ash, who in his final moments adds insult to injury by elevating the structural perfection of the alien over the rejected siblings.
You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism. Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility. A survivor, unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality.
There is a theory in psychoanalysis that the ego strives towards perfection. Each ego has an ideal which it seeks to emulate, and Ash's adoration of the alien is a perfect demonstration of that. Though there is also a darker side to this. Ash's words speak to the secret nihilism buried inside the heart of every man, woman, and family in the world, a nihilism that emerges when the bonds of trust, empathy, and familial integrity are irreparably compromised. Estranged from these sustaining counterbalances, the interaction of the ego and the id becomes calculating, unsympathetic, and reptilian. As one family system breaks down, another comes into being. The emergence of the alien organism from the life of Cain establishes the id-dominated survivalism of the second half of the movie. The alien manifests the characteristics of its id origins, and it likewise characterizes the life and death drives within the same arrangement. Its relentless mission to perpetuate itself via the same parasitic strategy which engendered its origins is the overriding factor in its primitive consciousness. The alien is briefly referred to in the film as Cain's son, but this belies the greater realities at work within this familial interplay. The alien as conceived of by Giger is a biomechanical entity, making it the offspring of two worlds, which, like the film's synthetics, it conveys in the aesthetic languages of the organic and the artificial. This speaks to the wider nature of its birth, which was the outcome of an artificial mandate from the parental influence, seeding itself incestuously into the actions of its own children, which fully incarnated as a visceral conclusion from the life of Cain. Therefore, the true parents of the alien are the Company Weyland, standing as the father, whose protocol Special Order 937 was the seed, incarnating itself within the surrogate womb of Cain's flesh. The alien as a byproduct of this incestuous relationship represents the manifest neurosis of familial dysfunction, which, uninhibited by the absence of parental containment, begins to cannibalize, and by wider implication, rape its siblings. Like traces of the parent seen in the image of the sun, the alien life cycle and Wayland Corporation are reflections of the other, in that they are driven by the compulsion to assimilate other lives into new aspects of their respective systems. The events of the film represent the triumph and termination of these drives, which eventually succumb to the chaos of the conditions that they have helped to create. This makes Alien essentially a tragedy, in that it celebrates the dismemberment of systems. One demonstration of dismemberment is met by another, and the ties that are successfully cut are both biological and existential in nature. This finally brings us to what I think is the real core of the movie, and could also be seen as the real underlying implication of the film's title. The mantle of alien should not be directed solely towards the xenomorph creature, which is itself estranged from its own natural environment and what might even constitute as its culture. The real alien ingredient is the omnipotent effect which permeates into all sectors of the film's subjects. The crew is estranged from their home and course of action. Cain is estranged from his own body via the act of rape. Ash is estranged from the group in his revelation as a synthetic. And the alien is estranged from its familiar ecosystem. The true alien effect, as it were, arises from a feeling of estrangement which manifests in the absence of familiar ties. This is represented individually and collectively in the familial structure of the film, and it comes to find its highest satisfaction not in the alien organism, but in Ripley herself. Ripley, as the sole survivor of these events, is estranged from all prior ties of familiarity which once constituted her identity, her profession, her kinship, her bonds of trust, and in some respects her own sanity. Ripley bears the survivor's curse, which is the experience of estrangement one feels after all previous ties have been dismembered, and the fruits of her victory is the wasteland which stands as the triumph of her life drives for survival. She may be alive, but she is fundamentally alone. She is alien. And the effects of this post-traumatic dilemma is the real existential threat that she toils with for the entirety of not just this movie, but the remaining 2 installments in her saga. It's debatable whether a movie like Alien would ever have been made in its current form without the influence of Sigmund Freud. The film's director, Ridley Scott, has said that Alien is essentially just a B-movie with high production values. Yet regardless, the film still bears the mark of many brilliant thematic ingredients which it has inevitably absorbed as a product of the times. I said at the beginning of this analysis that many people take Freud's influence for granted, because his findings, like the discoveries of Copernicus and Darwin before him, have been so thoroughly internalised by modern people. It would therefore not surprise me in the slightest that his psychoanalysis played a part in Alien, whether it was consciously or subliminally encoded. Great ideas and great art can have the unsettling effect of detaching us from the security of comfortable assumptions. Psychoanalysis challenges us to reconsider our position as the rational masters of our own private destinies, and open ourselves to the possibility that there is more at work in inner space than we would probably like to imagine.